Hello, everyone. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today for a brief webinar on the real economic benefits of precision roll grinding and services. We trust that you continue to stay healthy and safe as we all continue to navigate through this COVID-19. We will talk a little bit today about how we can do that together without disrupting uh, services and disrupting our ability to partner on showing real economic benefit to roll grinding and services. Uh, just a couple of housekeeping items. There is a chat function in this webinar. If you have a question throughout the webinar, please feel free to use that chat function. At the end of the webinar, I will ensure that everybody has the ability to unmute if you want to ask a question verbally. Throughout the webinar, we try to keep participants muted just because of background noise and that kind of thing. So with that, we'll get started. So the promise to provide real economic value, we would encourage you when you're working with your roll service grinding service and grinding provider to really think of those services, both the grinding and other mechanical or machining services, as an investment, not necessarily as a line item cost. We understand that it is quite often, and most often actually, a line item cost on somebody's maintenance budget. And it's kind of a necessary evil, right, to make sure that rolls grinding and roll services take place. However, you really ought to be partnering with your service provider to take a look at the true economic value of precision roll grinding and services. And that's what we want to step through today. This reaches every market that is using rotational equipment, and particularly in cases where you have rolls working together, whether it be forming a sheet of metal, flaking corn, or flaking a soybean, if it's making a sheet of paper, plastic film, semi-rigid PVC, rubber, all those that have working rolls working together. Precision grinding and precision maintenance and precision machining is crucial to the efficiencies around your process. So how do you go about doing that? Well, again, we would encourage you to think of it this way. Work with your service provider to develop joint designs of experiment to reduce variation. Having over 30 years of experience in manufacturing myself, variation kills efficiency. And oftentimes it's variation that gets lost in the shuffle or gets lost in the fog because we're looking at bigger picture stuff and bigger issues around just maintaining our manufacturing facilities, maintaining the workforce safely and productively, and those kind of things. So reach out and partner with somebody, and Precision Roll Grinders does this. We have an entire application engineering group, as well as our account managers that are very skilled, very adept at partnering with folks to develop a quick joint design of experiment and to look at data. As you can see represented there on the right-hand side, it all starts with data. Many processes have automatic scanning platforms or automatic measuring of whatever product you're producing. Other manufacturers take tests manually, but there's quite a bit of data there. So what's the plan for variation improvement? And then how can we predict an improvement in variation over time so that you know what to expect each time out of your precision roll services and grinding, more importantly. So we've been able to partner with a number of our customers, I know, to take it to that level, to develop not only a means to reduce variation, to predict it, and then most importantly, what's that worth at the end of the day? Well, as we mentioned earlier, okay, that's all great stuff, but that generally historically has been done on site, right? Well, we're in a situation now where we really can't do that in a lot of cases on site. There's means to do that virtually. Precision Roll Grinders has actually developed a means to do that with some partners where we've developed um, procedures around how to transfer data or how to um, get samples virtually through, FedEx, UPS of mail, to take a look, to measure ourselves and to take a look at variation before and after roll grinding and roll services. The beauty of being in 2020 is that data generally is readily accessible. It's readily um, passed, via computers, via even cell phones. We've worked with customers on, hey, take a picture of what you're seeing and let us take a look at it. Um, your roll service provider really ought to be that trusted advisor when it comes to roll services. You've got 1,000 other levers that you need to pull in your manufacturing facility. So let's partner with somebody that, or we'd encourage you to partner with somebody that can really take a look at how their services are affecting your variability. So there are means to do this virtually, and we wanted to encourage you to think about that and to reach out to us um, to talk about it, because we've been successful over the last 6 months to, well, when did this all start? In March, almost 9 months now, to with doing that with various partners. So what are virtual value-added services? It's data analysis, sampling, and testing, like we talked about, and it's statistical validation of real benefits. That's, as an example, if you can take the moisture content variability in whatever product you're making and reduce that because you've got press rolls, or you've got coating rolls, or you've got some other type of rolls working together that allow that variability to be lowered, can you shift your process to make a product that's got more water in it and less raw material? Are you wasting raw material because you're having to compensate for a profile in a product that is inconsistent, and you've got to run more raw material to make up the difference for those low spots? Is there inconsistency in flaking, as an example, whether it be making cereal flake or soy flake for oil extraction? Is there variability there that can be reduced so that there's better quality on the end and less waste, or a more consistent product that allows for consistent extraction and better oil yield? Just as an example, um, really ought to be taking roll services to that level, particularly with respect to grinding, not just looking at it as, well, it's been a year, we know those rolls are out of shape, let's get them ground. There should be real economic benefit, and we can partner with folks virtually to do that. And then the other piece is virtual troubleshooting, pics, videos. I forget how many combined years of experience are in our field sales force, but it's I think it's 200 or 300 years of combined experience. So your role service provider should be that trusted advisor specialist, that has an understanding, working in partnership with your process and how those roll grinding and services affect it at a real economic level. So what matters in precision rolls? Well, it's grinding. It's pre-grinds in the case if in the case of rolls that have some other kind of covering on them, whether that be chrome or tungsten carbide or rubber, if that covering is being replaced. The substrate has to be right, or whatever that covering is not right. And that translates to being able to regrind it more often, to being able to defer capital because you're not covering it as often. And again, at the end of the day, it's reducing variation. And it's not only roundness, it's also shape from end to end, and it's concentricity from the center line of the journal. And we'll talk about those three. It's maintaining the surface and optical properties that you need to produce high quality product. Um, Again, this is across many industries. There are industries that need a specific surface finish to make sure, as an example, that the soybeans are pulled into the flaker properly, or that the corn is pulled into the flaker properly. That's much different than another market that may need optical properties because they're making a film of plastic that's going to be printed on, and there can be no defects. So ensure that your roll service provider understands surface and optical properties as much as the geometric tolerances that we were talking about in the first example. It all plays together. And again, at the end of the day, we'd encourage you ought to be talking to your roll service and grinding provider about, okay, what's the real economic benefit? How is this an investment for me as opposed to just a line item maintenance cost? Because it should be an investment. We realize that roll grinding and roll services are not inexpensive, but they do have a return. And that's what we want to talk about here. So let's talk about the first component of reducing variation. Roll roundness matters. This is an example of a precision ground roll versus a roll that was ground in bearings. We realize that there's a thought process out there that you grind it in bearings because that's the way it runs, and we'd ask you to reconsider that, right? And we'll talk about it with respect to concentricity and shape of that roll too, but you can't produce roundness any better than the bearing play will allow you. And in many, many cases, that is too critical to overlook. And we might even argue in all cases that it's too critical to overlook. Most of the manufacturing equipment out there is being asked to run faster, more efficiently, and with less downtime than it was ever originally designed to do. It's the nature of North American manufacturing. In many cases, if you've got brand new equipment, then you're one of the fortunate few. So with that, tolerances on that machine should not be getting looser, they should be getting tighter, right? And there, again, it's got to come down to proof of economic benefit, right? But those tighter tolerances allow for rolls to run longer. They allow for rolls to run more consistently, which means you have more consistent product over time, less quality defects, less downtime. So the scale on these they are the same. So you can see the difference with being able to grind it off the journal versus grinding it in bearings. So roundness is the first geometric component that we really need to pay attention to. And why is that important? You'll see on the left-hand side here, that's actually, pardon me, carbon nip impression paper that was run through a set of working rolls in the machine direction. So as a web of products being made, you can obviously see what we call barring or machine direction variation there. Okay, well, it's real high frequency, real short. Why does that matter? Well, there's studies out there that show that variability in product thickness, and again, it could be a sheet of paper or a web of paper you're making, it could be a web of plastic, a rubber through a calendar. That short-term variation directly correlates to short-term strength variation. And the example there that you see on the right-hand side is in paper, but it also translates to other products. 5 to 10 microns was a strength variation difference of 20%. So those mystery efficiency losses that you have around working roll sets of, the web breaking or, quality not being quite right. Let's take a look at variability that might be getting induced because of roll roundness. Roll shape. How is that roll shaped properly? Does it have proper crown in it? If it's flat, is it perfectly flat? It depends on how heavily the two rolls are being loaded together. Depends on what kind of product you're making, but there are absolute inefficiencies in not having a good shape in the roll. It translates directly to the profile of the product that you're making, from drive side to tending side of whatever machine that you might be running. And it's not even in continuous webs alone, it's also in, again, as an example, flaking operations, where, okay, we have a more we have a thicker flake on the back than we do in the center than we do in the front. You know, is there a taper in the roll? Is the roll not shaped right? Is it building a crown into itself over time? Those inefficiencies, again, um, should be able to correlate directly to economic benefit. So reduced material usage due to a thicker or wavy sheet, localized thinning in a material profile that generally manifests itself in strength issues, and ultimately improved end product construction. Are your converters seeing issues? Are the downstream processes seeing issues? You know, is extraction of oil less efficient? If you're rolling steel, are your converters seeing inconsistencies? These are the things that we can directly correlate to economic benefit. Again, thinking of roll grinding and roll services as an investment instead of a cost. And these are just two quick, the real life case study here. Obviously sanitized because we're very conscientious about the non-disclosure agreements we have with folks. But in this case, target material thickness is represented by the green line, and they were running an average thickness, much heavier due to the fact that the profile was inconsistent. Proper roll grinding allowed that profile to become much more consistent, and you can see now it's more of an average, tighter control, around that target material thickness, and that translated to hundreds of thousands of dollars in saved material per year. So roll shape really matters too. And it could be any material, again, rubber through a calendar, coating in a coating operation, that kind of thing. And then the third geometric component that we really need to pay attention to is concentricity. So how the face of the roll should be perfectly concentric to the center line of the journal. If not, you're putting a cam into your manufacturing process. Even if it's a slight cam, it's still an inconsistency. It still goes back to that machine direction variability we saw represented in the carbon nip paper, which is building excuse me, variability and inconsistency into the product. This is often overlooked. It is certainly overlooked if you're working with a roll grinding provider that is grinding in your existing bearings. And we understand there's cost involved there, but again, at the end of the day, let the economics tell a story. Let's partner and look at a study and conduct that study and see at the end of the day what happens. So this one just says surface finish matters. We talked about surface finish too. This is some typical tolerance work that Precision Roll Grinders does. We'd encourage you to really question your roll service provider. You know, what kind of tolerances are you capable of? Are you even capable of the OEM specification for these rolls? What kind of finish tolerances are you capable of? You know, 10% of our work has tolerances less than 2.5 microns. Our typical tolerance is 5. So, you know, our typical tolerance is, I think that's 2/10,000ths of an inch. So you may not think that tolerance is necessary in your process, and your specifications may be 1,000th or half a thousandth. But again, is that roundness there? Is the shape there? Is the concentricity there? So that when you put it in your machine, it's going to run not only more consistently, but longer. And we'll get to that here in a little bit, because it does directly correlate to roll run life. At the end of the day, economics, it's got to pay for itself. And this is just an example, but we work and partner with our customers to put together specific economic spreadsheets for or analyses for their manufacturing process. And we're working on the ability to allow customers to kind of plug and play with this, right? We can give you, customize a spreadsheet and give it to you now so you can kind of plug and play. We realize you can't share a lot of that information with us on cost structure, but it allows us to make sure at the end of the day that we're bringing true economic value. Another piece of roll life and roll performance is mechanical excellence. Bearing inspections and seat grinding and replacement, complete inspections of internals as well as the face of the roll, journals, housings, it's all got to work together. There's a reason that your machines were designed with precision rolls in them in the first place. So it just ensure that you're working with a roll service provider that's capable of doing all that. Quite often we see that excellence in mechanical aspects of rolls and excellence in machining aspects of rolls along with the grinding really affects startup time. When you put those rolls back into your machine, you're not having to search for that sweet spot, that it comes to it much quicker. And again, that pays big dividends economically. So making sure that the bearings are right, that the bearing seats are right, that worn components are replaced is really critical to on-time startup and profitable production. The internals of a roll, in many cases, thermal transfer is critical, right? Whether you're cooling or heating, making sure that the internals are right to prevent sheet scorching or hot spots. To prevent thermal runout, we know that metal expands and contracts thermally. So how can we best partner with you to do that? Is it required to do a three-dimensional grind on it so that it can be at operating temperature, so that it can be ground at ambient temperature going forward? We're capable of doing that kind of thing with you too. And at the end of the day, generally it really helps increase production speeds because you're taking that variable of differential heat out of the equation. So why is all this important? We've talked about the production parameters around why it's important: reducing material usage, reducing scrap product because of being outside of specifications, preventing disruptions in the production, whether it be the web breaks or inconsistent flaking, that kind of thing. At the end of the day, it also really drives roll life. And this is a real life example again, where a roll that starts at 2 10,000ths roundness tolerance versus a roll that starts at 8 10,000ths roundness tolerance. The deformation of a roll is a function of, or the wear of the roll, I'm sorry, is a function of the deformation of the roll. And it's not perfectly linear. It's actually more of an exponential curve. So the closer to perfectly round you start can have a significant, and you can see here, 2.5 times difference, significant impact on how long that roll will run within proper tolerances. It's the analogy that is used quite often is like a washboarding effect on a road. Road can be perfectly smooth, and as soon as that washboarding starts, and take a long time, but as soon as that washboarding starts, then it really takes off and it gets bad quickly. So we can see this in the case of 8 tenths versus 2 tenths. In a lot of cases, people would say, oh, for crying out loud, you're talking about 6 10,000ths of an inch. Well, you can see here that it took 15 months to get to the point of regrind versus 6 months. And it took a year to get to the deformation where you started at the other grind. So again, translates to real economic benefit. What are the safety components of not having to change that roll as often? The cost of the maintenance and the rigging and everything else that goes along with it. So again, promise to provide value, an investment, not just a cost. So can you partner with your roll service provider to show a decrease in material usage, an increase in quality, extended roll life? In many cases, we're dealing with manufacturers whose process costs anywhere from $10,000 an hour to $25,000 an hour. And in roll services are generally in a maintenance budget where it's a fixed number. So a difference in roll services of $5,000 or $10,000 seems unnecessary. However, if that difference of $10,000 yields $100,000 in return, maybe we ought to look at that. And that's what we're talking about. So this is another case study that was over $500,000, just because one of our partners decided, let's take a look at what tighter tolerances can do for us, right? So tens of thousands of an inch can lead to hundreds of thousands of dollars is what I'd like to leave you with. So again, we'd encourage you not to look at roll grinding and services as purely a cost. We'd encourage you to look at it as an investment and to really push your provider to do this kind of work with you. And Precision Roll Grinders does this work. Again, we have a dedicated application engineering group, and we have a dedicated account manager group that is committed to this, committed to statistically validating reduction and variation in your process and driving that to real economic benefit. So again, we're at 26 minutes, and usually I try to keep these to 20, but this one I'm real passionate about. So I'll finish here and see if there are any questions. But please reach out to us. We'd be thrilled to talk to you about the real economic benefit of these of precision roll grinding and services. Your machines were built as precision machines. They ought to be maintained as precision machines, and we'll leave it up to any questions that anybody might have at this point. And I will make sure that everybody has the ability to unmute themselves if you would like to ask a question verbally. Okay, we did have one question come in on what kind of returns have you seen? It's a great question. We've seen returns in 6 weeks, and we've seen returns that are 6 months. And the costs associated with more precision grinding and maintenance of rolls. But our goal is to really see how quickly we can partner with people to make that return come to them. And we've seen returns anywhere from $10,000 to over $1 million because of the effect that it has on the real economic benefits. Okay. Another question, do you have how much experience, I'm sorry, do you have in virtual studies? We've done a number of them over the last 6 months. I don't know the exact count, but we've done studies where we've partnered with people that send us data that is automatically collected on their machines, and we do the analysis, and the analysis is Six Sigma rigor kind of analysis on the data and the statistical piece of it. We've also put together packages where partners can send us samples of what they're actually producing, and we measure it on their behalf and take a look at the variability as well. So I would encourage you again to use your local account manager as a contact, or these numbers as a contact, and reach out. We'd be happy to talk to you about that. Okay. Are there any other questions at this time? Well, we certainly appreciate your time, and we'll have this available on our website very shortly for reference down the road if there's anybody that you would like to share it with. And again, we'd encourage you to really look at your roll grinding and services as an investment. There should be real economic value to it, as opposed to just a line item maintenance cost. And we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you.